Station Pier has an important role in my life because it's the pier where my parents, Helmut and Irma Dahn from Hamburg, Germany, arrived in 1954. They set off in the cold of winter in January 1954. They left from Bremerhaven via Malta, then Port Said, then Colombo, then Fremantle, and then Station Pier. What was their departure like? Well, they were 22 years old, newly married, and thrilled and excited to be embarking on such a big adventure. But they were the first of their respective families ever to have emigrated, so there was a certain amount of anxiety in them as they left. They were very mixed feelings, but certainly leaving the cold of a European winter, and given that they, in theory at least, only expected to stay for 2 years, they were pretty excited as they disembarked at Bremerhaven in January 1954. I think deep in their hearts, though, they knew that this was going to be a life-changing journey for them. During the journey, despite the fact that they were married, they were separated in their living quarters. My father, Helmut, was very seasick during the journey, less so my mother, but they had enormous fun. There was great food and plenty of food. There were activities and fun to be had on board. They were very interesting stopovers for them to enjoy, and there were many other German families and single Germans for them to get to know, many of whom became lifelong friends. Their feelings on arrival as they drew up to the old Station Pier, the first impressions were that it was pretty old-fashioned and pretty backwards. Their first impressions of Melbourne were that it was a big, sleepy country town. Their first impressions of the weather were that it was glorious, and their first impressions of the food was ugh. The train was already at Station Pier. They had a short layover, but the train took them straight to Bonegilla. The CWA, the Country Women's Association ladies, had stops planned for them on the way where they were given brewed Australian tea and sandwiches. They actually felt on that journey like they were 12 years old and going off to summer camp. And when they saw the barracks that they were going to be housed in, they felt that they were right on the money. Two years further down the track, Mum and Dad are no longer in Bonegilla, but they've obtained work in Melbourne, and they've settled in a rented house. Wilma's letters from Hamburg were increasingly distressed. She was still single at 29 after a number of broken engagements, and my mother encouraged her older sister to take the assisted passage journey to Melbourne, to Australia, because they had such a wide circle of eligible young men that were very anxious to meet potential new life partners. So Wilma left Germany in the winter. It was May 1956, and it was on Sitmar's Fairsea boat, the ex-US naval ship that had been refurbished. And I know something of her journey because she wrote some of it down in the diary that's in front of me. So if I take what the diary says as an indication of what I can share, she had no sadness at all in leaving Hamburg, in leaving Cuxhaven. She was agitated, she was anxious, she was cross because it took her 30 minutes to find her cabin and her berth. But after she'd located that and hung up a few things that she was allowed to have on board, she found the bar, had her first ever Chianti, and she was having, or about to have, the time of her life. So the trip for her was utterly life-changing. She'd met a young steward, Hans Günther, on I think it was day 2, though it could have been day 1 with the Chianti, I'm not sure. He was a steward in the dining room. and he takes an immediate shine to Wilma and she to him. He brings her fruit every day from the kitchens, and nightly, when his duties are over at 10 o'clock, they meet on the deck. They then go dancing every night in the bars until 2 a.m. When they get to Naples, he takes her on a journey and she enjoys her first ever espresso and her first ever gelati. In Port Said, he buys her a handbag and a powder compact. And then in Aden, could have been the clincher, he buys her this tiger baby that's in front of me, a tiger baby that she's cherished since that time. They participate in the equator crossing ceremony with gusto, but in the mornings after the 2 a.m. dancing sprees, she has to take it pretty quietly. She cools off in the swimming pool and lounges in the deck chairs. She does mention in her diary the dreaded English classes, and she's vaguely aware that a lot of people are seasick around her. She sort of notices in the distance that there's deserts, there's heat, and there's a lot of poverty all around her, but she really only has eyes for Hans Günther. Now, he's forbidden from fraternising with the passengers, and this need for secrecy, which is talked about in the diary, must have added some spice to the affair. Well, fast forward to June, when her ship, the Fair Sea, arrives at Station Pier. Now, my parents had arranged for a posse of 8 eligible young men to meet Wilma on arrival. It was the day that the pier would witness a pretty strange scene. The young men are in their best suits, they have fresh haircuts, they smell glorious, they're lined up, they're smiling, they're talking and they're laughing as the ship pulls in. Wilma is thrilled to arrive, and she's thrilled particularly because she might now have some private time with her Hans Günther. She looks at the simple old pier from way, way up on the deck, and the city or town in the distance. She leans over the railing and she finds her sister, and she shouts out hello and says that she's had a marvellous voyage and that there's so much to catch up on. Now, the young men have spotted Wilma at this point, and they're all waving and smiling, trying to catch her attention, talking quite animatedly among themselves. Now, the formalities do take some time, and the passengers can't disembark for nearly an hour. And while all this is happening, the employees are on board receiving their instructions. But when the signal's finally given, Hans Günther, he pushes through the crowd of passengers who are commencing their disembarkation, and he finds Wilma and he takes her arm and he walks down the gangplank with her. Now, my parents and the posse of hopeful boys push forward in their turn, and they move forward towards the huge shock that's coming as Wilma finally reaches Australian soil with the greeting, "Hello, hello, meine Lieben. I'd like you to meet my fiancé."